Anyway, great to talk to you, man. We're having a little pre-chatter just to let the audience know. So anyway, you just asked me, I guess the last time we spoke, I was just beginning to realize I was probably going to vote for Trump, but I hadn't yet decided. And so you just asked me what pushed me over the edge to do it, and how do I feel about how it's gone so far. And I guess it was the assassination attempt and Kennedy's endorsement. I was searching for my political identity. I was searching,
Mhm.
among other things, also for a strong leader, a strong communicator, and I found it in Kennedy. I guess interestingly, I didn't really, in the same way that I wasn't attracted to Trump necessarily for his immigration stance,
Mhm.
some people consider core to his political being. I wasn't really attracted to Kennedy necessarily because of his medical stances either. I was fairly ignorant of them. I just liked how this guy conducted himself. He was unafraid and he was strong and he was, I don't know, I just really liked Kennedy, and he filled the vacuum. And so when the assassination attempt happened and all the buildup I had prior to that of starting to lean towards Trump's way and the Kennedy endorsement, I used to say a year ago when this all went down, I say, man, this endorsement was like a psychological permission slip. And so I just followed him, man, and it was
Mhm.
instantaneous. And I became a pretty strong Trump supporter right away and started to pick up some followers on social media because of that clarity. You learn a thing or two eventually about effective communication, and unfortunately along the way, right? And
Mhm.
unfortunately, I guess is an interesting way to phrase it, but you do need clarity and certainty, and I lack that so much in my life. I got a little taste of certainty with this Trump thing, and what do you know? People don't want a fence sitter. They want someone who knows where they stand. So you also asked me why I rebranded, and look, I mean, the long and the short of it is, like I said, I wanted to keep doing this podcast, but searching for political identity, maybe it didn't feel right to keep doing it. Maybe I just wanted to get something a little tighter, you know.
Mhm.
So who knows? But here I am, still doing it, and very pleased to have you as my first guest, man.
And man, it's a pleasure to be back. I really enjoyed our last conversation. For those who don't know me, I'm Ryan Mullally. I'm a lawyer, and I guess we're both lawyers now, which is
Yeah.
fantastic. And yeah, I think I totally agree with you. There's a real hazard of our profession is that we're by nature fence sitters. You ask a lawyer a question, and they're going to say, "Well, this could happen or this could happen, and
Mm-hmm.
here's the analysis, and it could go this way and this way." And often we're not willing to lay it on the line that way, which is why we annoy people.
Yeah.
So just as a trade, it's a risk. I think that it's interesting. I did not end up voting for either candidate in the last election. I didn't think I was comfortable with either one of them, truthfully, and so didn't. But I will say that there's something you said that resonated, which is by the way that the Biden Harris switch happened, it kind of made clear that Biden was in pretty bad shape by the end of his presidency, meaning he probably wasn't running the show, or at least not in the way a vigorous executive would. And then Harris being anointed without having to run for it, when a lot of people remembered, she called him a segregationist when she was running against him.
Right.
Biden didn't like her. Like she was not
Right.
a popular figure. She ran at 1% when she ran against Biden in 2020. So this is
Not the
not a
smoothest baton handoff situation.
no. It very much gave the impression on some level, and I have many criticisms of Trump, so I'm not trying to hand wave those, but it gave the impression that there was a choice between a bureaucracy, which
Mm-hmm.
was the Democrats,
Yes.
and a man who was Trump. And I think a lot of people were turned off by it for the reasons that you said, which is that they didn't want to vote for a political apparatus. They wanted to vote for a person. And they felt like that was the choice. It was, do you want to entrench this apparatus, or do you want to vote for a person who has smashed that apparatus on his side and is not beholden to it? And I think that did resonate for a lot of people. Obviously not for all, but for a lot of people, that was a concern.
Yeah, no, and it's going to tie into something which I know we're going to get to, preview for everyone, originalism. When we talk about that, we're going to talk about how process and outcome matter to guys like us. I think it's going to be a strong
Mhm.
connection there. So anyway, I'm glad it's you as my first guest and not the fascist I was going to host, although I was looking forward to talking to him.
I'm not a fascist, so I hate to disappoint you.
Yeah, no, I know. I mean, it's okay to talk to someone who has extreme views, isn't it?
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I often say that to me, like socialism, communism, however you want to parse that, is like the stigma attached to communism should be the same as attached to Nazism. Like it is a
Mm, right.
murderous, terrible ideology.
Mm,
But I have had conversations with people who purport to be communists. I don't know what's in their heart of heart, but that's how they
right.
identify. And I think it is important to have conversations with people who have views that are really different and to poke some holes in those views. It's not, you don't have to be accepting of them. But it is useful to have that skill. And it's really weird to me when lawyers get uppity about like who you're
Mhm,
talking to. I
mhm.
remember after the last time I talked to, actually, Destiny's always in trouble. So every time I talk to Destiny, some new horrifying allegation about his sex life leaks,
Mhm.
because the dude is constantly has horrifying leaks about his sex life
He
happening.
can't stop blowing people on camera. No,
And,
I'm just kidding.
I
Oh,
mean, that's like the most minor of them at this point.
oh goodness.
But and then you're like, well, why are you talking to it? I'm like, do you know what I do for a living? Like, do you like you
Mhm.
think that talking to somebody who's
Right,
accused of doing something bad
right.
is hard for me?
Yes,
Like,
this ability
all my
to
clients have been accused of doing something bad. Like,
yeah,
this is what I do for a living.
I think most people who end up going to law school, become lawyers, have the ability to certainly have the ability and are kind of interested in holding a thought in their mind and not necessarily embracing it, right?
Yeah,
Isn't that an Aristotle quote about the mark of a keen mind? So we like to analyze things. We like to put ourselves. Look, it's interesting to talk to people with extreme views. It's a fine line. You don't want to encourage people, but if the idea is that sunlight is the best disinfectant, and you're confident that fascism is wrong, then why not host a guy if he's respectful, which he was to me. And I did a quick scrub on his profile and I didn't see anything hateful. I said, okay, no. I looked at the American Fascist Party platform that he
mhm,
was connected with, and I said, okay, like this is a rational platform. It's controversial. Some
mhm.
parts of it are totally reasonable. Some parts of it are controversial, but it's rational. And there's nothing about Jews or I thought it was kind of okay. And then one of my followers the morning of pointed out all these posts, and I go, "Oh my god, where did these come from? This guy is talking like he's Adolf Hitler. I didn't see it. What the fuck?" And next thing you
Well,
know, I think that follower of mine, thank you, Chip, probably reported him and got him nuked from X, and suddenly we couldn't hook up. So it was fate that a more reasonable guest is the first one. So it's all good.
yeah, glad to be here. And yeah, I think, look, it's one thing to have conversations and talk to people who have kind of extreme views that you disagree with. I think that's totally fine. I rebranding from searching to political identity to your own name and the first guest is a
Right.
fascist, that might have sent a message you didn't want to do.
Thank you,
So
Chip. Thank you,
thank
Chip.
you,
But I'm,
Chip. You're doing God's work.
I wasn't gonna back out. If the guy had said to me, "Hey, man, like this is my alternate email address. Just shoot me the link," I would have done it because I made a commitment,
Yeah.
and I think it would have been an interesting conversation.
I,
But
I'm and hopefully you can chat with them later. It sounds like
yeah,
it would be.
right. But
Yeah.
it's anyway. So let's. You want to talk about that Tim Kaine clip?
Yeah,
That was
yeah, yeah.
incredible, right? So
I don't
let me set
know.
it up. Let me set it up. So you're a natural law expert. You're going to help me clarify what it means. But if I take for granted at the moment that natural law has something to do with rights coming from God and
Mhm,
that being the underpinning of our Constitution, it was fascinating. You had Tim Kaine, must have been on the Senate floor during some hearing. I don't know what it was the other day, and this Tim Kaine is not a godless man. I think he was a missionary. He was like a Jesuit trained guy. So he's had God in his life. He's very familiar with religion and Democrat and an intellectual and highly respected, I would say. Obviously, he was Hillary Clinton's choice for VP in
mhm.
2016. So not a slouch. And he gave this 6-minute speech or so, just kind of lambasting anyone who believes in natural rights, really saying, I wrote it down here. He said, the notion that our rights don't come from our laws or government should make people very nervous. And to a natural rights person, you go, whoa, 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 what do you mean? Why would that make me nervous? But he went on to say that, hey, this is what the theocracy in Iran does and so forth. This is what, who knows what leader does. They interpret what their interpretation is from God and they impose it on the people. That's natural law. That's very dangerous. And at first I was like, oh, what are you doing? Like, no, natural law is a good thing.
Mm.
And then I began to see he was making an egalitarian argument, which guys like me and you appreciate. No,
Mhm.
we like this egalitarian part. So I wasn't really sure what to make of it. And in fact, he made it clear he wasn't putting down natural rights per se. He was just saying, don't discount the fact that we also do get our rights from the Constitution. So, and then you had Ted Cruz, who made this very powerful refutation where he called Keynes' comments radical and against the founding principles of our country, quoted the Declaration of Independence, of course, and used slavery as an example of when the laws are unjust. So if there's a conflict between the laws on the books and then the laws that come from God, we know which ones win. Slavery, case in point. So, Mr. Law, natural law expert, what did you make of all that?
Yeah, so I went on the warpath a little bit after these comments were made, and the reason I did, my YouTube channel is called Natural Law, by the way. So this is, this is an interest of mine. The quote that I would read is Tim Kaine said, "The notion that rights don't come from laws and don't come from the government, but come from the creator. That's what the Iranian government believes. It's a theocratic regime that bases its rule on Sharia law and targets Sunnis," and he goes on. The thing is, though, if you look at the Declaration of Independence, you just look at like the plain language of the Declaration of Independence, which I did on stream earlier today, and did on a video a day or two ago. Our founders clearly said that we have natural rights that come from our creator. That's what they said. Now, that's not a legal claim. You can't go to court and enforce your natural rights.
Right.
It's a
preamble to the legal claim.
It's a moral claim.
Right.
They're saying they in the Declaration of Independence, they were tasked with something very difficult. They had to explain why rebellion against England was justified. Why is it morally justified? Now, 99% of the time when countries do this, it's because they're a separate ethnic group. Like if you look at Ireland's Declaration of Independence, it says the Irish are a free people, so we deserve to throw off the English. The Americans were not a separate people. They were largely British. So what they said instead was there are certain natural rights that are given to us by our creator. They are objective moral rights. And if those are trampled on and sufficiently infringed, rebellion is justified. You get to change the government. And that's what's happening here. So when Tim Kaine said he's troubled by the notion of natural law, what bothered me about it is that he was doing a little bit of a semantic slide, where when someone says a constitutional right and a natural right, those are two different things. A natural right is a moral claim. A constitutional right is a legal claim. And he seemed to be conflating the two and saying that all rights come from the government. But that's not what the idea our country is founded on. Our country is on the idea that the highest moral obligations are actually natural law, and that our government should be built around that premise to protect those rights, and those can't be rejected. Which is why, which is why I don't know. The comments he made struck me the wrong way. It felt like he was attacking the American moral proposition,
making it an either or when it's really not.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think it's also. I don't know if you've been following this dialogue, but if you talk to let's say a Christian nationalist or an ethno-nationalist, maybe a fascist, I don't know.
Yeah, no, this is exactly what that
we'll find out.
Yeah, exactly.
What they'll say is something like, well, if you talk to an ethno-nationalist, they'll say, well, how come white people don't have a homeland? Every race has a homeland. Why shouldn't America be the homeland for white people? And the answer is because that's not our moral claim to statehood. Our moral claim to statehood in the Declaration of Independence was the protection of natural rights. We are a propositional nation. That's what we were founded to do. We were not founded to be an ethno-state. There are many nations that are founded that way.
That is so key for me to register, because we talk about Israel and I'm a Jew, and it's like, trying to make sense of this political environment. And well, wait a minute, do they have a point? If every other state almost is predicated on some sort of ethnic line, why not America? And there you go.
That's why we were founded not on an explicit ethnicity, which is not to say that the founders were not largely homogenous ethnically. They were, but that's not. They could have said that. They could have said we are a separate people now. We are, they didn't. Instead, our founding was based expressly on philosophy, on the belief in natural rights. Now, a lot of people are atheists. They don't believe in God. They don't believe in a creator who will endow them with natural rights. And that's okay. There's ways you can get there philosophically, which are a little bit more complicated, but they exist. But I think more importantly to me, it's like if you're playing a chess game and in the middle of the game of chess, you say, I don't believe in checkmate. Well, it's like, well, you can't not believe in checkmate. You're playing chess, right? Our country was founded on this principle. If you reject the principle, you are rejecting the entirety of the country.
And that's why he called it radical.
Yeah, you're asking for a revolution. And that's what the ethno-nationalists, the Christian nationalists, the communists are going to say. We reject the founding proposition.
Right.
We'd like to replace it.
So it fed into it probably was not intended to be divisive, but it ends up being a divisive comment.
Oh, for sure. And this is why Ted Cruz, I think, was right to call him out, because you have to be very careful when you are saying things like that. It's why I criticize President Trump when he is kind of cavalier in the way he speaks about the Constitution, because I think our leaders need to have the utmost reverence for our founding principles and our constitutional framework. And they should express that, because the thing about being a country that's founded on a moral proposition instead of an ethnic group is that an ethnic group just persists. If you go to India, you're going to see a lot of Indian people. It's not, it's going to remain that way. That's kind of just how things are. But a philosophy has to be taught. You have to teach each generation of people to believe in the American proposition. So when you have sitting members of government rejecting the American proposition, that strikes me as a problem. Like, how are we supposed to have future generations that believe in these principles if our current leaders don't?
And that is probably the strongest criticism against Trump. And I will absolutely echo that. Regardless, you could say, judge him on what he does, not what he says. And okay, some of what he does is even controversial, but let's say most of it is okay. It's okay. Not all of it. Certainly not all of it. And we know I wasn't a supporter of how far he took his election challenge in 2020. But the example he sets is potentially very concerning. Not everyone has a cool head like Brian Eskow, and they ain't going to go too far. So there's that. That's the strong.
It's a serious problem, and I think I called out Senator Kaine for his language, but I think you have to be objective about stuff like that. Like with the flag burning stuff, Trump said he wanted to put people in jail for a year for burning their own flag. That's nakedly unconstitutional. Like, the case law on that is very, very clear. There's not a question. It is, you could still go to jail for violating a local ordinance. Don't burn things in public, et cetera, et cetera. But if you're on your property burning your own American flag, you have a constitutional right to do so. It's a 5-4 decision. It's settled law.
And didn't his oh, go ahead.
But his executive order was much more careful. The actual executive order didn't say that we're going to put people in jail for burning their own flag. So his lawyers know how to be careful and to set things up in a way that's not like burning the system down. And I appreciate that. But I still think it's fair to criticize him for saying things that don't display a reverence for our constitutional system, even if his action is more careful than what his statements indicated.
Perfectly valid. I'm with you on that. I just want to go back. I have this note I jotted: white people only. The critics of traditional American culture will say, well, those natural rights, look how flawed the first iteration of the superstructure that we built upon those natural rights was. And so that's why they want to condemn it. And that's kind of their whole line of attack, is that underlying, they will attack the foundation because that first structure was so terrible.
Well, I think, there's two ways to approach that. One is like the principled answer, and I'll segue to that in a second. But I think the more important one is the tactics, right? Like, and you see this coming from the left and the right now. So you have to be able to identify it. When the left wants to attack the foundation of our society, they'll do what you just said. They'll say, oh, weren't the founders actually racist? Didn't we have slavery? Didn't we have all these horrible things? So we should reject the whole proposition because the proposition didn't lead to the kind of society we would want instantly, right? And on the right, when you talk to like a Christian nationalist or a ethno-nationalist, they'll do something similar. Well,
They
they'll
got
say,
it right though.
yeah, they'll say, yeah, they were all white people, right? So clearly they meant white people only. That's what they meant, right? So they're both rejecting the proposition. They're just coming at it from different angles. Now, the actual answer, which is hard to do on like X because you have to think in paragraphs, not in hot takes, is that when you say natural law, it's an objective moral claim. Like when we say the laws of physics is an objective science, or the laws of logic is an objective science. So it is unsurprising that people who believed in natural law didn't understand it all and made mistakes. Like anything else, like it would be very weird to say that Newton was an idiot about physics because he doesn't understand relativity. It just they hadn't discovered it yet. So if you go back to the founding era, the phrase "all men are created equal," that phrase fueled abolition. That phrase is why we rejected slavery ultimately. Like the idea that was the fuel that led to the abolition of slavery was right there.
And therefore you could trace the fracture, the source of the fracture. They embedded the idea right from the beginning.
But at the time that was written, this is like a very rough thing to even think about. But back then, at that time, remember, this is almost 100 years before Darwin. There was not scientific consensus that all the races were the same species.
Right. That's the counterpoint. It's like, did they even consider black people?
Some of them didn't. Like some of the founders thought slavery was wrong. Some of them didn't. They wrote the phrase "all men were created equal," and I don't think that all the founders agreed on what the phrase "men" meant. I think some of them thought it meant white men, and I think some of them meant it meant all men. And over time, we've learned it should be properly interpreted to mean all. But that wasn't what they knew back then. And the fact that they were imperfect and that they were not able to create a society that lives up to today's moral standards in the 1700s is, in my mind, kind of a laughable critique. Like, of course they didn't. Like that's a standard that no one can pass. If you apply today's moral standards to any era of human history, you're going to find people lacking. But if you do that, that also means that nothing in history is worth knowing or respecting, which doesn't follow.
Yeah, very interesting. All right, let's turn our gears to originalism because, again, like I said, it's all relevant. Talking about process versus outcome and this kind of thing, as to why someone might be more of a centrist or not associate with the modern left. So it's certainly relevant to my journey here as I plug along. And so, and I know you've done a video recently about originalism, so I think this will be perfect.
Yeah, always happy to plug originalism. That's one of my great interests.
I remember at Rutgers, I don't know, it was like 2013 or 14, I guess it was my first. So I went to community college right away because I didn't, I didn't get terrible grades in high school, and I didn't apply anywhere right out of high school. Interned at a recording studio in Manhattan. It was a great time, but eventually realized, hey, I should probably be getting an education. So did save my parents some money at local school, and then did my final 2 years at Rutgers, where all my friends were in New Jersey. And in my first, it was at Rutgers. One of my first classes, it was a pre-law class, and I somehow knew the professor through a family friend. Anyway, all I remember from the class is there was one guy who was the professor said, "You're going to be a gunner in law school, and you're going to be that guy." That certainly wasn't me. I was in the back of the class. But the one thing I remember the professor asking us is, why do these people with 9 black robes, why are they so special? Why do they wear black? And what is their significance in society? And that really is the underlying question of originalism. So, as you say, so truly, beautifully, you're a great teacher, man. I can tell you have a teaching background. So I do encourage people to go check out your YouTube channel. You say it really comes down to what the role of a judge is. Is the role of a judge to make law or enforce law? Because with originalism, the judge, with the living constitution method, which is the opposite to originalism. So if originalism is the method of interpreting the Constitution based on what the framers intended it to mean or what it meant to the public according to those words at the time, either one of those interpretations, the living Constitution would be, no, the way to interpret part of the Constitution is by today's moral standards. And so that gives the judge power to make law. And so suddenly we're in a different sort of constitutional arrangement. So interestingly, also, as you point out, Scalia, the famous proponent of originalism, suddenly then becomes a defender of democracy. And most people most people wouldn't put him in that role, right? So tell me more.
Well, I think starting at the end there, which is a perfect segue, most people conceptualize constitutional rights incorrectly. They view them as exclusively a good thing, right? They say, oh, I have this right, I have this right. Isn't it wonderful I have so many rights? They can be wonderful. I'm not saying they're not wonderful, but absent from that is any analysis of what a right actually is. A right is removing something from the democratic process. When you have a right to free speech, that means people can't decide through the democratic process to limit your speech in certain ways. If you have a right to bear arms, you can't, through the democratic process, limit the right to bear arms, right? These are limitations on democracy. Now, they can be good, but they are limitations on democracy. Now, once you see that, then the logic of originalism, I think, follows almost instantly. Because if you have judges and they're sitting there, and their job is not just to interpret the law, but to invent new rights that are not listed in the Constitution, but just to invent them because they think they're good things. Well, maybe they are good things, maybe they're not. But every time they invent a new right, they increase the sphere of judicial control and they decrease the sphere of democratic control. And in a democracy, we should want the people, through their elected officials, to tell us what the law should be, to make new laws, to pass constitutional amendments. That's what the legislature does. The court should just be interpreting laws and saying, this is what the law says, this is not what the law says. The court should not be inventing new rights, because every time they do, they seize power for themselves and take that power away from the people. It's the least democratic branch of government, and it should not be allowed to aggrandize itself. But that's exactly what happens. I mean, like, the truth is, like, overturning Roe v. Wade was very controversial, obviously. But there was never a majority in Congress that could even pass a law, let alone a constitutional amendment, protecting the right to abortion nationwide.
Right.
Instead, there was an effort to create the law through the judicial branch, through lawyers making cunning arguments. But in a democracy, that's not the way you want these weighty moral decisions to be made. Not by 9 judges who were never elected by anybody. You want that to be made
not by litigation.
People. Yeah. And that might be frustrating. It's like they say, oh my God, we can't get the votes. Well, then you can't get the votes. That's how democracy works. It's frustrating you can't get the votes. I get that. That's incredibly frustrating. But if you can't get the votes in democracy, then you should not get to impose your will on other people. That's how democracy works. So, yeah, I think that once you view rights in that sense, the originalist conception that protects the people from judges, basically, makes a lot of sense.
Right. And then people will say, but, what about the minorities who have identities that were suppressed or what have you, that are in need of protection? And unless we, who's going to protect these people if we can't pass them from the tyranny of the majority? What's the argument in response?
Well, we have the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, right? So, like, this is no longer a question of, I don't think there's any rights in this country that citizens have that vary based off their ethnicity or the color of their skin. There's no legal differences there.
Right.
And the reason is that we passed constitutional amendments that did that. We passed legislation, the Civil Rights Act, that accomplished those goals, right? These things were done through the democratic process. Now, there are edge cases in the court's jurisprudence where the court went out on limbs and did things that maybe originalists would disagree with. But originalism doesn't require that you reject every non-originalist decision. We still have in law, we call it the principle of stare decisis, which is if it's been decided by the Supreme Court, it's the law. Whether or not you agree with it, it's the law. And a case only gets overturned if it's egregiously wrongly decided, not just not to your taste. So it's totally true that from an originalist perspective, you might have had a hard time establishing like the right to interracial marriage as a constitutional right, because that probably isn't a constitutional right as the founders wrote it or as ratified in the 13th, 14th, 15th. But the law's the law. There's no, it was decided already. So you don't, just because you're an originalist doesn't mean you have to reject all prior case law. And that, I think that's often a misconception that people say, well, what would happen? You say, to the rights of minorities. I don't think much. I don't think anything, actually. I think maybe Justice Thomas and maybe Justice Alito would vote to overturn those cases about interracial marriage and gay marriage, but I don't think any of the other justices would. Is my guess, even the originalist ones. So I don't think there's a real risk there. And also, if those were overturned, I think we would pass laws enshrining those rights almost instantly.
Right.
Because I think society has decided on those things. I think if you did an opinion poll on interracial marriage, you'd get like 90 plus in favor. I think it would be very easy to pass that law. So I'm not too worried about judges stripping that right from people, because I think that honestly, it's just not going to work out that way.
Yeah, it is interesting how originalism to me is very attractive. I think to you as well. It seems reasonable, and yet also there are times where it's not. We don't think it should apply. That's so. What are we? Are we originalists? Are we originalists with an asterisk? It's hard to take a principle and apply it uniformly without exception.
Yeah, and originalism isn't like magic. It's not like it's not going to solve all your problems. It's a judicial philosophy, and it works better than the alternatives. That's really what it comes down to. Yeah. But Justice Scalia was clear about this. He often said there are cases where you are not able to resolve the question through originalism, and there's other times where a decision might be made on non-originalist grounds. So just to give you two examples, when they were trying to take Trump off the presidential ballot in Colorado, and the Supreme Court said 9-0, Colorado can't do that. That decision was not written in an originalist perspective because they needed all 9 justices to sign it, and many of them aren't originalists. So it was written from essentially a living constitutionalist perspective because they were trying to get the votes of everybody. So do I like the decision? Yeah, but it's not an originalist decision, and I think we can be honest about that. And then there's other cases where the originalist analysis basically ends and you have to use other tools. So in the Trump immunity decision, there was an originalist question, which is, does the Constitution give the president any immunity whatsoever? And you can look at the structure of the Constitution and determine that yes, it does, right? So yes, the president has some immunity, but how far does that extend? Now that we've announced there's immunity, what are the rules for that immunity? What's the nitty gritty? Well, the Constitution doesn't say that. And there's no originalist interpretation that's going to give you that. So having used originalism to reach the conclusion that the Constitution does provide some immunity, they then had to use other tools to articulate the doctrine, which they did. And they looked at prior case law, they looked at the Nixon cases, and they reasoned from there. But that doesn't strike me as a flaw in originalism. I think you can be honest about that and say originalism is the best possible tool. We should use it to the extent we can. And there are situations where it's just not possible. And when it's not possible to use originalism, then justice will use the other tools available to them.
Yeah, makes sense. And so here I am, an adult. I mean, I was 28 when I was a freshman in law school, so I was an adult for sure. And but very much a child of the left and really not paying too much attention. But originalism felt sensible to me because I had that history back in my back pocket of that professor asking about 9 judges in black robes. And so I already had an innate skepticism, maybe not innate, but a pre-programmed skepticism of that process. So it felt very reasonable to me. I was drawn to it. And you get pretty much your freshman year in con law, you get exposed to originalism. And then in my final year, I do the CRT electives, which just total inversion of, living constitution on steroids. Very interesting, though, actually, how whereas originalism and Scalia, as you put it so well in your video, made the case that originalism asks, who is my ruler? Is it the people or is it this group of 9? CRT, and I actually took a jurisprudence infused CRT class that was like perfect for this, right? The CRT justice would say, no, I got to infuse the Black perspective into my opinion because we, the judicial branch, are the ones who decide things. So let's infuse the Black perspective into. So it is very much in common is the question, who is ruling me? It's just where the center of power should be. So, I didn't like how the left was approaching things from politics by litigation by any means approach. And then the CRT thing was just very culturally, very controversial. So you could see how a person started to shift to the right and okay, now I'm searching for political identity. And you could see how a lot of people of a similar mindset would have either migrated to Trump or not voted for the Democrat, given the circumstances that you alluded to. So interesting times. What do you make of it?
Well, I mean, in the New York City area, I don't know if you remember this, but it couldn't have been more striking. And this wasn't national politics; this was local politics. But it was it was and is a Democratic stronghold. So it is the Democratic perspective, and I'm using that as the political party, not the voting system. During COVID lockdowns, there were people in New York who wanted to have anti-mask protests, and they couldn't get licenses to protest because of the medical emergency. So they weren't, it was illegal to go protest because of the medical emergency. So you couldn't even protest the restrictive measures that were then preventing you from protesting, right? But that same summer, when people wanted to protest in support of the Black Lives Matter movement, they were granted the permits. And the logic was racism is a health epidemic. So countering racism justifies lifting this restriction that was applied to people who were protesting the mask mandate. Now, I got the vaccine, and I'm not making any arguments against its efficacy or anything like that. But you don't have to be a genius to see how that played out. The government basically said, if you have the right opinion, we will grant you specific privileges that we will not grant you if you have the wrong opinion. And people remembered that. And they remembered that during Trump's first term, when affirmative action in colleges, which for those who don't know, that's the practice of using race as a plus. So, if you apply and you're Black or you're Hispanic, you might get a plus and be more likely to get into a good college. The Trump position was that was racist and should end. And in the Biden years, Biden sent his lawyers to say that process should continue. So for people who I think find CRT distasteful because they correctly say it's inherently racist, it's just saying that some kinds of racism is okay.
Right.
I think people noticed that was the mainline Democratic position. And for a lot of people, that was a problem. They said, this is a bad idea. It is an idea that deserves to be defeated. And I think for a lot of people, like I said earlier, I didn't vote for Trump, but people who did vote for Trump, a lot of them have told me they did that because they were holding their nose and voting for the defeat of ideas. They were saying, Trump's not the guy I would pick. But if we elect Trump, we are repudiating this bad idea. We are saying this does not stand, try again, and sending a message. And I think that definitely impacted the election. And CRT jumped out of law school into the headlines. It was definitely in the atmosphere. It was in the air during that election.
Yeah, no, and I was there at the culmination of it, studying it. So it was really this, my whole experience as a podcast host is really the CRT thing is really fundamental to it. And so, yeah, I think Trump, to me, represents the centrist position, not the fascist, white, racial component that the Nick Fuenteses of the world believe. I don't necessarily know that. I do think it's probably fair to say that he believes, he's one of those people, but maybe not. I don't know. But these people, the alt-right, let's say the woke right, whatever you want to call it, I don't think Trump is one of those people.
I don't think so either. I think that there are many criticisms I make of Trump. Like, the fact that he's making billions of dollars off his meme coin while in office is crazy.
Right.
So, I think there's a lot of things you can say about him. I don't think he's a member of the woke right. And when I use the term woke right, because people get mad at me when I do that, when I say woke, I mean people who invoke collectivism or identitarianism as a justification for attacking the American proposition, natural rights, constitutional rights, classic liberalism. I don't think Trump is that guy. I think that what happened, though, is that he has kind of the superpower of getting those people to vote. Because typically the fringe doesn't vote. Like the communist left doesn't vote for Democrats. They just attack Democrats all the time. I think the kind of like the fringe white identitarian right didn't typically vote. They do vote for Trump. And if you look back at the midterms, when he was running, he won the election. But when he was off the ballot and it was the midterms, people didn't come out. I think he seems to have some superpower to appeal to that base, but I don't think he's a member of that base, if that makes sense.
Yes.
I think
I think so. He's got the magnetic personality, he's got the charisma, he's got a willingness to take strong actions that have a positive effect on legal Americans. And so a white supremacist or someone who's even just remotely cognizant of racial politics and thinks about it, I don't know, for whatever reason, they might be saying, oh no, this is good for me, so even if Trump's not outright endorsing David Duke. So I think Trump's brashness, especially in contrast to Obama, of course, just the contrast and his willingness to take strong actions is enough for these people to go, you know what, this is good for me. Even if he's not singing my song exactly, this is okay. I'll support him.
Well, it's kind of like the when he got the support of the Christian evangelical movement, right?
Right.
And it's
he's
like
one of us.
Does anybody really think like if you looked at Trump and Biden and you said which of those men is more religious, more Christian, it's obviously Biden. Like, I mean, I don't think that's a hard call, right? But I think the Christian evangelicals recognized that he was on board for putting originalists on the court, and the originalists he put on the court, who have been fantastic, Justice Barrett in particular has been an absolute treasure, but they did overturn Roe. So, I think that people do hitch their wagon politically for a variety of reasons. Now, that does beg the question, though, like, what does a white nationalist, what's the appeal for Trump to a white nationalist? And I think that is the border. That's what that comes down to, that he has restrictive immigration policies.
Right.
I think they agree with him on that. So if you're like an ethno-nationalist, they're like, well, he's the only game in town who's serious about immigration.
Exactly. Exactly. So do you think gay marriage is going to be overturned?
No, I don't think so.
You don't think so?
I don't think so. And I think if it was overturned, it would become legal in 35, 38 states almost instantly, and then would become legal in the rest over time. I think that ship sailed culturally. I'm trying to think if you're asking just would the court overturn it? I'm trying to think about the justices.
I saw some article, a couple of weeks ago that seemed to suggest like it's in the works.
Well, I know Alito and Thomas would overturn it. Roberts, I don't think would. Barrett, I don't think would.
But doesn't the principle of Dobbs, or I'm asking actually, does the principle of Dobbs go there for all of these cases that are based on the right created by judges, justices, of bodily autonomy and all of that?
It depends what kind of originalist you are. And this is an interesting point because originalism is not a monolith. There's different subsets of it. And I think just to make it simple, I'll talk about like Justice Thomas's originalism and Justice Scalia's originalism. Okay. And I'm going to make the assumption that Barrett is a Scalia originalist because she was his law clerk and she seems to be his successor. So Thomas is like the most hardcore originalist, which means every decision needs to be grounded in the original public understanding of the Constitution. And if it's not, it's wrongly decided and should be overturned. So Thomas would overturn gay marriage, interracial marriage, all of these things because they were not grounded in an originalist understanding of the Constitution. Scalia, when he talked about Roe v. Wade, he said, like, look, there's tons of decisions I disagree with. I disagree with all those ones like gay marriage, interracial marriage. I don't think
all
those
the
are
ones you might imagine I disagree with.
Yeah, he said, I don't think those are constitutional rights, but I also think they're decided, and they're not egregiously wrongly decided. They shouldn't be overturned.
Mm-hmm.
Roe was different, he said, because Roe and Casey, for Planned Parenthood, which is the successor to Roe, they not only created a right, they then created a standard and then required judges to apply that standard in ambiguous ways. So if you think about like the case that says, I think it was Loving v. Virginia, you can't outlaw homosexual sodomy. That's not a hard rule to apply. If a state outlaws gay sex, then you look at it and you say, you can't do that. That's very easy for a judge to do.
Yep.
Casey said, you cannot unduly burden the right to abortion. Well, what does that mean? Let's say a state says you have to get a sonogram before you get an abortion. Then it goes up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court sits there and says, God, does a sonogram unduly burden abortion? I don't know. Well, we made up the right. Then we made up the standard. Now we're going to make up how the standard applies to this fact. This is just judges acting like legislature. They're just deciding the rule every time. So he took issue with that because that's egregiously wrong in his mind. Whereas something like, okay, you're not allowed to outlaw gay sex. Does this outlaw gay sex? Yes, it does. Unconstitutional. That's more what judges do. That's very simple. So I would suspect that Kavanaugh and Barrett and ultimately Roberts would vote against overturning gay marriage and interracial marriage. I don't know, but my guess is they would vote against.
That's actually a very helpful explanation as to why there would be more friction to getting to those other places.
Yeah, I think Thomas and Alito would definitely vote to overturn.
Right.
I don't think that they have the same. I think originalism looks the same from the outside looking in, but inside there's definitely factions, and I think the factions differ.
And I think it's important to say for people who would cast judgment on Thomas or Alito, they may be bigots, they may be all what you're imagining them to be, but it's also possible that they just really believe this principle of originalism. And like Scalia said, it's not really about what I believe, it's about who's ruling me. So what if instead of viewing Thomas and Alito as bigots, people who have the natural inclination to do so, what if you say maybe they're just defenders of democracy?
Yeah, I don't think that's a fair charge to level on them. I think I don't think Thomas is saying it is unconstitutional to protect gay marriage, or it's unconstitutional to pass a law in a state or federally that protects gay marriage. His view is that the Constitution does not do so. Right? That's a very different question than whether the government can do so. The government could be free to pass such laws even if they were overturned. It's kind of like after Dobbs happened, because I have daughters. Like some people ask me, they're like, "Well, what are you going to do now that you have kids and your daughters no longer have the constitutional right to abortion?" And I was like, "I live in a blue state. The law has not changed." Right. Because the state I live in already had more rights than the Constitution under Roe and Casey provided. Right. So it's when they say it's not part of the Constitution, they're just returning it to the democratic process.
Yeah.
Now, maybe the argument is that you shouldn't return it to the democratic process, but that's different. It's not a repudiation necessarily. It's just saying that people ought to be able to decide this issue for themselves.
And it's you got to respect states' rights, right? I mean, now obviously up until a point. And it's fascinating how slavery and states' rights, and it's the entire basis of our Civil War and our inherent original sin and all of this. But nonetheless, 2025, you got to respect, you got to have some freedom to breathe and explore and be those laboratories of democracy, because you can't run a country of this size by stranglehold.
I think this is the most essential point. This is bingo. This is the bullseye. The problem we're having right now is that Congress often is deadlocked, and our system is designed for Congress to be deadlocked. If you look at like UK or any parliamentary democracy, it's very easy to pass laws. It's almost impossible to pass a law in our country.
Mm.
And it's designed to only work if you have a powerful majority. That's on purpose. The federal
Mhm.
government is supposed to be limited, and then the states are supposed to be trying things out. And that laboratory of experimentation is critical because it turns out on a lot of issues, people in California and people in Alabama might just have different ideas about how they want to live. And yes, there are some issues that are national. We have to speak with one voice. We have to have one answer. But on a lot of
Mhm.
issues, you can just let people figure it out. And that
Right.
does mean that they're going to do things you don't like. They're going to do things that
Right.
might hurt people in a way that you don't like.
Mhm. Right.
But if we have to have everything resolved at the national level, that means we have to have a super consensus on every issue. And a lot of the time, not for every issue, but a lot of the time, I think people would be better served if they asked themselves, like, well, why do I, sitting here in the New York City area, need to decide how people in Arkansas live? Why is it so important that I pick how people in Ohio live?
Right.
Maybe they should get to pick how they live.
Right.
Like, is this truly an issue where we
Right.
need the federal government to decide it for everybody?
Yep.
I'll
That's
tell
the
you,
beauty of the system. That's the challenge. That's the dance we have to do.
yeah, and I'll tell you a story that really resonated with me. I can't remember who told me this now. It'd be better if I could remember. But the story was, I think it was either Rob Noor or Admiral Gibbs, various conservative streamers. But they were saying they would never vote for a Democrat nationally, never, because these are rock ribbed conservatives, right?
Mhm.
Never in their life would they vote for a Democrat nationally, but in local elections,
Mm.
they vote for Democrats all the time
Hmm.
because in a local election, you're not voting for the party, you're not voting for the establishment and all that comes with it. There are two people from your town running for city council. You know them. And, Tim is a Republican and Mike isn't. But Tim's an asshole. You know Tim. He doesn't pay his bar tab. He welches on his bets. He's not a good person. You don't want him in power. And Mike's a good dude, even though he's a Democrat, right? And so they would vote across party lines locally because they understand the people and they trust them and they can make that determination. Whereas nationally, they wouldn't. So when you make everything national, it's going to
Mhm.
turn into gridlock and kind of like
Right.
party on party fighting rather than picking the people that you think are best suited for the job.
Yeah, no, that's actually really interesting when you think of the ramifications that come with national power and how that would morph and potentially distort someone's voting preference because, hey, just because I want this on the local level, I have other principles. There are other people in this country. It's it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think that we were founded on the notion of federalism and limited government. And that is an important, and dovetailing to the original conversation, um, that's an important aspect of the quest for natural rights. Because
Mm.
the thing about natural law is we don't know it yet. We have to learn it. We know
Mm.
some of it and we try to figure it out. Like I would say that over the course of American history, we've learned that there's a moral obligation to treat people as individuals.
Mm.
I don't think we knew that at the founding. We certainly
Mm.
didn't, right? That's why we had
Mm.
slavery. I think we learned that. And the only way to
Mm.
learn that is to let the experiment play out. If
Right.
you have like a mono party dictating terms to the whole country, then you no longer have the laboratories. You're no
Right.
longer going to be able to see how people live the best. And the answer might be, by the way, that for certain questions like abortion, I think is a big one, people don't agree. They
Right.
fundamentally disagree. They
Right.
and the difference between I'm protecting a woman's right to bodily autonomy versus you are committing murder, that's not a small moral disagreement. That's a
Mhm.
fundamental difference.
Right.
And maybe if we can't agree on that,
Right.
maybe people have to be able to decide for themselves because
Yeah.
there's no one size fits all answer.
Yeah. It's really interesting. We're on a search. Everybody, I think, the majority of people, I would think, want peace and prosperity and
Mhm.
freedom and good vibes and all of that. And so, how do we organize our government in such a way to maximize those outcomes? And there are trade offs, and nothing is perfect. And so, you have to live with it. And so, it's a delicate process to get to that, to get to those answers. And, I'm thinking about Tim Kaine's speech about how, if you just leave it to someone to interpret natural law, well, there's a risk in that. And what you're saying is, no, you got to trust that humanity is good and is that we are in fact on this pathway to continually correctly unearthing natural law, and it is good.
Yeah.
You have
And
to believe that.
and you also have to believe in the progress that's been made, right?
Right. Right.
Like if you look at like the First Amendment or the Second Amendment, it doesn't say you have the right to free speech. It doesn't say it anywhere. It doesn't say you have the right to freedom of religion. It assumes you have that right and then says the government will not infringe it. Why does it assume you have it? Because of natural law. It assumes you have this right and then says the government cannot take it away. Now, to Tim Kaine's point, we've also learned, and Scalia talked about this when he talked about natural law, that judges are not priests, right? So did Scalia, a devout Catholic, believe in natural law? Yes. Does Justice Thomas? I think Justice Thomas might be the foremost natural law scholar in the country. He's very big into natural law. But the fact that you believe in natural law does not mean that natural law is a sufficient basis to decide a case, right? When you're deciding cases, you have to decide it based off positive law. What is the law? What does the Constitution say, right? But natural law is a moral aspiration. It's what we're trying to accomplish. And the moral rights that we've derived are important. They're part of who we are. And it provides armor against these fringe forces. Like, for example, when a communist comes in and says, we should take away the right to property so that everyone can be richer and happier. I don't need to hear anymore. You want to take away the natural right to own property. You are a villain. I reject you out of hand because it's un-American. Similarly, when a Christian nationalist comes in, and I don't want to besmirch all Christian nationalists, I think there's a reasonable version of the position, but the unreasonable version is we ought to put in religious tests so that only Christians can be officers in the government. It's like, no. The founders were a mix of Christians and deists. They could have said, we are going to follow the Abrahamic God or the teachings of Jesus. That could have been the Declaration of Independence. They didn't say that. They said natural law. They picked this lowest common denominator that wasn't overtly Christian, and they did it expressly to allow for the freedom of worship and the freedom of religion. You're rejecting the American experiment, so I reject your view, right? Like, I think once we understand what natural law is, we know what the guardrails of the system are. And you can say what's a fair policy position within America? What is something that we can agree as is like within bounds, as opposed to things that you just have to reject out of hand?
Yeah, and I think that's a key thing, is this idea of don't condemn me, Mr. Tim Kaine. And again, that's probably not what he was trying to do, but left in general, don't condemn the Natural Law Foundation. Don't condemn the progress we've made. Believe in it. Be proud of that. And build an argument that is uniting. Okay, you want to incorporate your point about laws on the books, actually being the legal basis. Okay, fine, but build upon the natural law, build upon our progress that we've made. Don't present it like it's an either or, and condemning people who are proud of the country.
Well, if I want to, it's not my book, but if anyone's read Alexander Solzhenitsyn's The Gulag Archipelago, which is an unbelievable book.
Wait, didn't Dr. Rechtenwald write that book?
No, it's Alexander Solzhenitsyn wrote The Gulag Archipelago.
I'm sorry. I was thinking of Google. I think Rechtenwald wrote a similar title with the word Google.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Yeah.
Probably good play on words. But this is a book that it really contributed to the fall of the USSR. And he was in the Gulag system and wrote this kind of anecdotal history of what was happening behind the wall of communism. And it was a hugely influential book. Read the abridged version, because the unabridged version has like 1,500 pages of Russian politics that no one will understand unless you're Russian. So get the abridged version. But anyway, one of the points he made that was truly beautiful was that in the Soviet Union, they rejected the notion of a higher power. The state was the highest power. So there's no creator. Your rights don't come from God.
No
natural law. The state is the absolute highest power. Now, what does that mean? Well, if you believe, as our founders did, that the creator gave you natural rights, if the state takes away freedom of speech, the state is being unjust. They are being wrong. You should rebel against them because they are They're now a tyranny, right? But if the state gives you all your rights, well, then the state can take them away.
Right.
What's wrong about that?
Right.
They are the origin of the rights. They are the arbiter of the rights.
Your role is to take it.
Yeah, you are subservient to them. Whereas our founding put not an overtly Christian, but a moral framework that was a higher authority than the government, and to which the government is answerable, and to which we can hold our government to account. That's a revolutionary idea. And it allows you to do things like say, even though slavery was legal, it's wrong. Why is it wrong? Well, our founding documents say all men are created equal, and you're not living up to that promise, right? It creates a moral structure. And
Right.
that
Exactly.
should not be trivially dismissed. And
Exactly.
whenever you talk to somebody on the fringe, and this is what pissed me off about Tim Kaine, their first argument is going to be Tim Kaine's. Their first argument is going to be, well, let's reject that moral proposition and replace it with my idea, which I think is better.
Yeah.
Well, who
exactly.
are you?
You have that structure. Here, what is it? God, Constitution, statutes.
Exactly.
And so there's room to play there. There's room to discuss, disagree, work. So why be so quick to reject it and condemn it? Right.
Exactly. And this is again why the structure of our government is the way it is. You don't want judges interpreting natural law. That's a theocracy. You really don't want that. So our judges don't and can't and shouldn't. They should be originalists. They should just interpret the documents, right? But natural law is our moral aspiration. How do we achieve that? Through the will of the people, through the legislature, through the laboratory of experimentation, by continuing to try to make a better society. So, I think that there's a little bit of a word game that happens where people conflate natural rights with constitutional rights or even like the more common term like human rights, because they want to degrade the concept. Like it's very common right now. There's a meme going around that says like, it shows basically Israel and the US and as the only countries that don't believe there's a fundamental right to food, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that the US and Israel don't is because the US and Israel are premised on natural rights.
Right.
You don't have a natural right to food. If you were on a deserted island, nobody's giving you food, right?
Natural rights impose a responsibility on the organism.
Yeah, natural rights are intrinsic to you. You're right. A right to an education is not a natural right. That's something society gives you. It's not intrinsic to you. So the U.S. framework is that natural rights are our constitutional heritage, not positive rights, which are a different thing. So it's a revolutionary proposition, and we should be defending it. We should be fighting for it because it's unique to us. No other nation in the world was founded on this premise.
I love it. And it lit me up. I mean, I've always been kind of a cartoon pro-America Superman kind of guy, right? Like I want to believe really in the founding ideals. And I got exposed to it in law school and I go, damn, I like this. And I'm pumped up talking to you about it now. And, that attraction has taken me a certain direction. And that kind of explains, I think, a lot of my search for political identity. It really does start with having a similar reaction to some of these core concepts that you did when you went to law school. So it was a blessing to have that education, and not everyone comes out of it the same way. So people will disagree, but ultimately it's about the process and which idea seems to have a better process. And, the outcome is determined by what we do as people, not the process.
Well, I mean, this is, I think, what was in some ways. Oh, sorry, I just lost my. See if I can fix it. I lost my video.
No worries.
Let me.
Ryan is live streaming also on his channel.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm a tech issuing my way through it. This is
fire your tech guy now.
Going. Yeah, I got to hire a tech guy and then fire him. Going back to what you were saying about CRT, I think in many ways this is what was so off-putting about it. Is that people get into the thing about like, what is racism? Is racism linked to power, or is it just treating people differently because of their race? There's different ways you can slice that apple. But I think what's most offensive to me about CRT is it taught that America is a uniquely evil nation. That's the core of
Mm-hmm.
it, that America has this original sin.
Right.
And I think that the better view of that is that America was founded on this revolutionary proposition that all men are created equal and endowed with inalienable natural rights. This is brand new. We ushered this into the world as the foundation for a government. And it's allowed us to accomplish incredible things. That does not mean we're perfect. That does not mean that we didn't do a lot of bad stuff, and we'll continue to do bad stuff. But to reject that premise is crazy.
Right.
And if you reject it, what comes next? Like, if you like, why is your pet ideology, not your, but the imaginary person, why is your pet ideology going to
what's it, a
rise from the
majority
ashes?
black culture? Like, okay, so if the argument, of course, there is such a thing as white culture, there is such a thing as black culture. The white culture is dominant. The black culture, I don't mean to be off-putting when I say the blacks. The black culture, it was a slip. The black culture should be more plugged in to what our mainstream is. So what is next? A culture, a monarchy of black culture? Like, what are we getting to? What is the point?
Yeah, I'll tell you, I had a debate with a socialist, and I was taking the position that socialism is immoral and un-American as a matter of philosophy, not because it does bad things, though I think it does, but not in terms of its consequence, just in and of itself. And my argument was this: I said, property rights are natural rights. Socialism abolishes the right to private property, so it's immoral because you can't open a business, you can't work for a wage, et cetera, et cetera. And he said to me, well, what if you're telling me that if I told you you have to trade your right to property, you have to trade your right to alienate your labor for a wage, but in exchange, everyone in society is much wealthier. Isn't that better? And I said, no, because you can't trade rights for outcomes. Just like if you change that sentence and you said, what if I could tell you that everyone would be wealthier and happier because we abolished the right to free speech? Wouldn't you think that was good? No, that's not good. Like, these are guardrails. These are moral principles. And if you reject them, you are rejecting the American experiment completely. And once you view them that way, then you can actually defend yourself against these kind of radical ideologies. Because what they're going to come in and say, the exact same thing comes from the right. They'll say, God, wouldn't it be better if all our politicians were Christian? Wouldn't everyone be happier if everyone was
Christian? You pick an identity group.
That's always what it is. They pick an identity group and they come in and they say, shouldn't we reject the American proposition in favor of my new idea to help this identity group? And that's woke nonsense. It's woke. It's woke nonsense when the left does it. It's woke nonsense when the right does it. And we need to be on guard against this because it's fundamentally un-American.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know. Do you feel like this stuff started exploding in the last 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? Has it been bubbling under the surface for a long time? Is this something we're going to get through quickly? What do you think?
I don't know. I think it's gotten a little bit worse under Trump because, as I said earlier, he actually has enfranchised the fringe of the right. Like, they actually vote for him. So now, they became politically relevant where they didn't used to be. So that was a change. I think social media has something to do with it too, because the thing about really bad ideas is you can fit them in a sentence, and they go on an X post really well. Like, you'll say, like, doesn't everyone have the right to food? And then you're sitting there being like, no, I don't think that's a natural right. I think that's a positive. The answer is a paragraph, right? Or they'll come in and they'll be like, we're not honoring Jesus's teachings. And you're like, well, our country's more complicated than that, right? Like, they have a sound bite and you have a paragraph. And I think people think in sound bites now. I think in previous eras where communication was in book form, people thought in paragraphs. So I think that defenders of classical liberalism, defenders of the American ideal, need to learn how to put this stuff into soundbite.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think it's, I don't see any reason why they won't be able to. We won't be able to. Let me put myself in that group.
Yeah, join the team, buddy. I'm happy to have you. Yeah, I think that this is something we need to get better at, because I think classic liberals for a long time have had a little bit of brain rot. And what I mean by that is they've just been too passive. Like for example, like when the flag burning thing came out, the classic liberal says you're allowed to do that. And they stopped there, right? I don't think that's enough. So what I did when that came out, I said, you are allowed to do that, but you shouldn't.
Mm.
You are allowed to, legally you're allowed to, but it is a fucked up thing to burn your country's flag. It is a
Right.
bad thing to do. Like
Right.
just the fact, I'll go to court and fight for your right to do it if I have to, but I'm going to tell you you're a prick because you're ungrateful for everything that you have, and you shouldn't do this. Just
Right.
because we believe that the government should be restricted doesn't mean that we have to be soft and passive about right and wrong. And I think that that's been a trap we fell into. Sometimes you see this with the Libertarian Party, where they'll,
Mhm.
anything to avoid taking a position, right? Where they just say,
Right.
okay, like we're just gonna anything goes as long as it's
Right.
all permissible.
Right.
I don't think there's any bite there. You have to actually
Mm.
stand up for a moral system. It's not enough
Right.
to say, we'll be infinitely tolerant, do whatever you want.
Hmm. Yeah. No, that's true. You need that friction, that texture, that grounding
Mm-hmm.
for it to have bite. Yeah, that's good. Well, man, every time I talk to you, I get really thrilled and about being an American and proud and determined to be a part of the solution here.
Yeah,
Not
I'm glad to have you on board, man. I think that teen classic liberalism needs its strongest soldiers right now. I think that
right.
there are we're seeing it all over the place. Like we talked about a statement from the president we found to be problematic. Statement from a sitting senator we found problematic. Attacks from the woke right. Attacks from the woke left. Like the American ideal is being attacked on all sides, and it needs people who are willing to stand up and full-throatedly defend it.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you so much. Honestly, man, like, thank you so much, and I'd love to have you back. Uh,
Absolutely, my pleasure.
Final question for you: who do you see as the next? I guess on the left and the right, the next presidential contenders. If give me your 2 cents on the next crop.
Whew, I think I've been my own little quest for political identity recently. I've been asking the left to tell me what they stand for. Every time I talk to someone on the left, I say like, "What do you stand for? Not who are you against? What are you for?" And the reason I've been asking that is I've come to the conclusion that there's actually a civil war happening on the left, where you have like the Mondamnis and the socialists and like the more fringe left,
Hmm.
and then you have kind of like the centrist establishment left, and the only thing they agree on is they don't like Trump.
Right.
So if you talk to them, all they want to talk about is Trump is bad,
Right.
because there is no Democratic Party right now.
Hmm.
It's waging coalitions. So right now, I have no idea, man. I don't think that I don't see a uniting voice over there yet.
Hmm.
On the flip side, JD Vance is an unbelievable political talent. I don't know if you watched his interviews on like Rogan and Theo Vaughn, but
Yeah.
like
Yes, I did.
that dude,
No, he's got the goods, man.
he is an unbelievable communicator, and
Right.
I do not think it would be an uphill battle for anybody I've seen on the left to
Right.
run against him.
Exactly.
So to me, I think the left needs new blood. They need like a new inspirational leader, somebody
Hmm.
who's going to come out who doesn't have the baggage, right?
Exactly. Right.
Because like you look at like Newsom, and it's like everyone knows how he ran California. Everyone
Right. He's
remembers
got the
all the.
baggage of his record during COVID, of being, if not TDS, let's just say a victim of focusing too much on Trump.
Oh my god! I mean, also like not for nothing, but like the dude slept with his best friend's wife. You know
Right.
what I mean? Like this is like this
Right.
is not like people
You know
know
what?
who
This
he
is our
is.
guy.
He's kind of a lizard man, right? Like people
Right.
don't like him. I don't
Right.
think he's the guy. They need to find somebody who didn't drink the Kool-Aid or wasn't nationally prominent during the 2020 years and can come out there with a new inspirational message. And that's what works. Like if you think about like Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, that's what they did. They came out, they had a new voice, they inspired people, and they people felt like they were talking common sense. And then all of a sudden the Democrats are a juggernaut. So maybe
Right.
maybe they'll find somebody.
I think
But
it's Dean Phillips, right
Mhm.
now. I like how he spoke out last cycle against, the I feel bad calling it a train wreck, but the train wreck of how the Biden term ended. And he's got innovative ideas. He's got executive experience. I know he's a congressman, but he's, run a
Mhm.
business successfully. And he also, and very importantly, has shown empathy and willingness to engage with Trump supporters and Trump himself. So I think he's in position, if he wants to really carve out a role that we're hungry for, which is someone who unites, brings fresh ideas, um, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think he could be a good candidate. I would say Josh Shapiro could be a good candidate, except I
Mm,
think that right now the Israel Palestine thing is so the
yeah,
friction on the left there is so extreme that there are portions of the left's tent that will not vote for a candidate unless they condemn Israel.
right,
And I don't know how they fix that.
right,
Truthfully, because that just seems like a friction line that's going to reduce their voter enthusiasm no matter what they do. Like
right.
if they came out and they started condemning Israel, I'm not a pollster, so what do I know? But I think they would lose, two people on the center for every one person on the left they gained. But who knows?
Right. Okay, real last question. How did you feel about the Trump administration's push to use statutes, maybe you call them obscure laws, um, bureaucratic laws, maybe even, to silence speech with regard to non-citizens in Israel? Did that raise hairs on the back of your
Yeah.
neck a
So,
bit?
so this is the thing about Trump that I say all the time. He often aims in a direction I appreciate, and
Hmm.
then actions it in a way I cannot countenance. Right?
Hmm.
Like the universities. We've talked about CRT a lot on this, in this conversation. The universities were overdue for a course correction. Like they needed a course correction. So in that sense, I'm glad he was pushing for that. I also think, like if you're a guest in this country, if you're on a student visa, you should want to be here. Like, like that's not too much to ask. That said, you can't ask universities for footage of protests going back
Hmm.
5 years so that you can target the protesters.
Hmm.
That's core free speech. You can't
Hmm.
deport people because they wrote op-eds you don't like.
Hmm.
That's core free speech. It reminds me of Robert Kennedy gave a press conference where he said, like, we need to ban the use of cell phones in primary school. And I was like, oh my God, yes, we should. As a former educator, that's
Hmm.
such a good idea. They're terrible. They ruin the educational process. And then he goes, because they emit microwaves that hurt your brain. And I was like,
Hmm.
oh, come on, man.
Hmm.
Like the direction is good, but then the
Right.
rest of the stuff you're saying,
Right.
I can't get on board on. And I feel like that happens a lot with the Trump administration where I applaud
The idea, but his
yeah.
the and I think this comes from him being a business guy and operating properties where it's like, dude, no, my building is here. I have a fence here. I have rules for coming and going. I
Mhm.
have rules for how you're going to behave when you're here. So, you can be a bit of a tyrant when you're a business owner, a property owner. And so you can appreciate the boldness and the leadership. But when you have someone in power like that, it does warrant close monitoring, even if you're a
Yeah,
big fan.
especially because he makes public statements, as we talked about, that don't show a reverence for the
Exactly.
constitutional system.
Yes.
So if the guy's saying that he is willing to overturn the Constitution or a constitutional provision, and then takes actions that are unconstitutional, it's hard to be charitable at that point. And so, what I wish is that he could maintain like the direction. I often, like I said, I normally
Just
agree
tighten it
with.
up, Don.
Tight,
Just
tight,
stay
yeah.
tighter to this form. You have a good idea base, but don't take it too far. Don't be provocative. Realize the power that you have and the eyeballs that are on you and the
Yeah.
and the influence you have, and channel that. Be a little more Obama like. Be a little more contained and composed, and let your ideas be the hammer. You know what I mean? Don't
Yeah,
necessarily drop the hammer.
and this is again, this is just me like reading the tea leaves. I don't know what he thinks, but I think sometimes he says things because he wants the reaction. He
Mm,
wants the overreaction, right?
sure.
So if he
Yeah.
says we're going to use the National Guard to fight crime, that's obviously illegal. Like it's not even close. It is
Mhm.
illegal to use the National Guard, not in DC, but in other states to fight crime. But then that leads Democrats to have like what are essentially pro-crime rallies,
Right.
right? And so
Right.
like I think he likes that. I think he likes controlling them by making people so angry that they then
Right.
take the bait and do this crazy thing. But I agree with you. I think that they're going to do that no matter what he does. I think that he's at this point the people who hate him so much that they're going to overreact to anything. So if he took 10%, 20% off his fastball, I think that he would enhance his credibility without going off these crazy limbs that are, to me, just aren't defendable.
Right. He is a character. I mean,
Oh,
there's no
yes.
question about it. And he's changed my life. I mean, I'm forever attached to him in some odd way now. And, I don't mean to overstate it. It's not that big of a deal. The world doesn't revolve around me, but he is quite a character and he has changed the landscape. And he's come in at a time where, I don't know, he just hit me, coming of age, so to speak, starting to pay attention, going to law school, trumping on the scene, COVID. What an incredible few years it's been for this country, man.
It really has been. And I think that one of the things that I've learned, which I don't know why it took me so long to figure this out, is that, when people talk about the marketplace of ideas, they say like, oh, the good ideas win. And in my mind, it was always like a clean process. Like people hear the good idea and they go, oh, that's the better idea. And then they all agree with it. That's not how it works. It's an ugly, dirty, messy process, So, you had the Democrats in 2020 throwing out like extreme tyranny in the name of essentially health initiatives and racial justice. And then you had the counter movement from MAGA. And that has all kinds of excesses that I think we agree are bad ideas that are now being litigated in the public forum. And then those will be rejected. And over time, we calibrate. But the process is not clean. It's super messy.
Right.
But the fact that it's a messy process doesn't mean it's not working.
Right. And it gives us something to do. People who like to talk about this stuff and are interested in positive outcomes for people. I think that's how I would classify both of us. So, the work goes on, brother. And that's why I decided to keep this effort going. So, so you're hosting your YouTube channel, Natural Law. Is there any other channel you're
Yeah.
hosting? Or?
Right now I'm on YouTube, Ryan C. Mullally, and X Ryan C. Mullally, and I'm live streaming this on both those platforms, which is new. So I'm trying to figure out how to do that. And I am hosting, various conversations and more often participating in either conversations like this one or various debates. So, check me out there. And I would love to have your support. I think these conversations are worth having, and I think increasingly people are interested in them.
Right.
So maybe we can keep it going. I think it's awesome you restarted your podcast.
Thank you, brother.
I was sad to see it go.
It's thank you so much for that. It's an honor to have you, and I'm absolutely game to keep this going. I'd love to have you in my stable as a recurring guest. I think you're a great mind. And your YouTube channel is really, really good. Highly recommend people check it out. All right,
and forgive my Luddite nature. I will endeavor to get better at the tech parts of the YouTube channel, but I appreciate the plug. And if anyone who listens to this is an editor and wants work, hit me up.
Right on. Hit him up. You know where to find him. All right, Ryan. Thank you so much again for your time. Look forward to doing it again real soon.
Always a pleasure, buddy. Talk soon.
Later on.